Hola amigos de JF Digital, hoy 18 de septiembre de 2024 vamos a conocer la rueda de prensa de la Misión Internacional Independiente sobre la investigación sobre Venezuela de la ONU. Bien, tenemos toda la rueda de prensa. En un video anterior hemos mostrado solo un extracto, pero en estos precisos momentos tenemos la rueda de prensa completa, donde manifiestan que el gobierno de Nicolás Maduro Moros realiza crímenes de lesa humanidad, entre otros. Bien, entonces rápidamente nos trasladamos a la ONU para poder conocer todo esta rueda de prensa y este informe. Recordar que está en inglés, pero también lo hemos subtitulado para todos ustedes para que conozcan esta rueda de prensa y este informe. Bien, directora, ¿tenemos las imágenes? Sí, ya tenemos las imágenes. Escuchemos.
Okay. Good morning, everyone. Thank you all for joining us today for this press conference with the Independent International Fact-Finding Mission on Venezuela. Joining us today are all three members of the commission. In the middle, the chair, Marta Valiñas. To her right is Mr. Francisco Cox. And to my right is Patricia Tapata. The mission will be sharing the findings of their latest report to you, which they are currently scheduled to present to the Human Rights Council on Friday. As you may know, the fact-finding mission was established in 2019 by the Human Rights Council to mandated to investigate gross violations of human rights committed since 2014. So now Ms. Valiñas will make an opening statement followed by her colleagues, and then we'll open the floor to questions. Thank you.
Good morning, distinguished members of the press and colleagues. Today, we present the fifth report of the Independent International Fact-Finding Mission on the Bolivarian Republic of Venezuela, which covers the period from 1st of September 2023 to 31st of August 2024. During this period, we have observed a worsening of the human rights situation, especially following the presidential elections of 28th of July. The period covered by our report was marked by acts of repression in the period leading up to the presidential elections of 28th of July, the massive protests that took place after the National Electoral Council announced President Maduro's victory, and the violent response by security forces and armed civilian groups aligned with the government. All orchestrated by the highest civilian and military levels of the government, including President Maduro. Our findings are overwhelming. Not only have there been no improvements, but the violations have intensified, reaching unprecedented levels of violence. In the post-election context, we have documented 25 confirmed deaths, most of them young people under 30 years old, from popular neighborhoods. There are 2 children among them. One of the victims is a member of the Bolivarian National Guard. Of these 25 victims, we have confirmed that 24 died from gunshot wounds. The other was beaten to death. The government claims that there are 2 more victims, one of whom, another member of the Bolivarian National Guard, apparently died in a traffic accident. But the government has not shared any details, despite our formal written request for information. Although we have initiated our investigations into these cases, we do not yet have sufficient evidence to attribute responsibility for the deaths. However, we can confirm the presence of security forces such as the Bolivarian National Guard and the Bolivarian National Police, sometimes accompanied by groups of armed civilians who fired on demonstrators during the protests. Between 29th of July and 6th of August, Venezuelan authorities admitted to having arrested more than 2,200 people. Of these, we have confirmed the arrest of at least 158 children, some with disabilities, and accused of serious crimes such as terrorism and incitement to hatred. This phenomenon is something new and extremely worrying. We are facing a systematic, coordinated, and deliberate repression by the Venezuelan government, which responds to a conscious plan to silence any form of dissent. As part of this plan, the government has instrumentalized the entire state apparatus, including especially the justice system, with a view to silencing any type of difference of opinion that opposes its scheme and to staying in power at any price.
Thank you, Marta. I would like to share more details on the systematic violation we have investigated. During the period between December 2023 and March 2024, we have investigated 39 arrests that we consider, according to our standard of proof, to have been arbitrary. The government invoked conspiracy to carry out this and other arrests, affecting more than 48 people, including civilians and military personnel. In addition, in the 3 weeks of the electoral campaign, between 4th and 25 of July, we documented the arrest of 121 people, most of whom were arrested simply for having participated or collaborated in opposition campaign events. The increase in repression after the elections was even more brutal. As Marta already indicated, in the week after the elections, the number of people arrested exceeded 2,200 people, according to figures provided by the government itself. We have been able to verify that at least 143 of these arrests involved members of 7 opposition parties, including 66 leaders of political movements. Politically motivated persecution is evident. These figures represent a level of repression that we have not seen since 2019. Of the people detained in this period, many were subjected to torture and other cruel, inhuman, or degrading treatment, as well as sexual violence, which was perpetrated against women and girls, but also against men. We reported electric shocks, beating with blunt objects, suffocation with plastic bags, immersion in cold water, and forced sleep deprivation, among others. And we also reported touching of breasts, buttocks and genitals, forced nudity, and invasive searches. We further documented preliminary elements of what could be more than 25 short-term enforced disappearances since the announcement of the election result. Previously, since December 2023, after a process of strict investigation and analysis, we concluded that at least 15 short-term forced disappearances took place. The anguish and fears of families in this situation is indescribable. We are also concerned about the increasingly intense closure of civic space. Freedom of expression was severely limited by attacks and judicial persecution against journalists, social media influencers, or anonymous people who simply share critical opinions toward the government on their social networks. We documented the arrest of at least 16 journalists and social communicators. Legislative initiatives in this period, through a National Assembly which is also subordinated to the government, restricted civic space more. In our report, we mention in particular the so-called NGOs law, which places arbitrary limitations on the autonomous functioning of civil society organizations, especially human rights defenders. This law was passed on 15 August in the midst of the post-election protests. We moreover mentioned the fascism law, which criminalized any political option different from that of the government and proposed severe penal and administrative sanctions for individuals, media outlets, non-governmental organizations, and political parties. We are deeply concerned about the safety of all human rights defenders and that of their families. Their voices are essential to ensure that violations continue to be documented and that victims are not forgotten. These figures represent only a small sample of the reality faced by thousands of people in Venezuela today.
Thank you, Patricia. The figures we have presented reveal the extent of violations committed. We cannot ignore that these violations represent a clear and deliberate line of conduct by the authorities of politically motivated persecution. We have come to the conclusion that many of these violations constitute crimes against humanity. In previous reports, we had already documented how the government of Venezuela used systematic repression to remain in power. Today, in this report, we confirm that this repression has reached an unprecedented level. President Maduro himself announced on 6th of August exactly 2,229 arrests since 29 July. This was the result of the so-called Operación Tuntún, which was announced in a mix of a mocking and threatening tone. Following this presidential order, without any attachment to legality or respect for the rule of law, we documented more than 40 cases in which the security forces entered private homes without warrants, just using social media videos as the only evidence to arrest people who they thought had participated in protests or who had expressed criticism in social media. In several cases, the houses in popular neighborhoods of people who participated in protest or expressed criticism were even marked with an X. As Patricia mentioned, before we have documented that in several cases the detained people were subject to acts of torture and ill treatment, as well as sexual violence. President Maduro even suggested that all people should be sent to labor camps to be re-educated. According to our investigations, all these arrests involved and were followed by serious violations of due process, reaching unprecedented levels in the country. The criminal proceedings initiated against detainees systematically failed to comply with the minimum guarantees of due process. The Attorney General announced before the people were arrested that they would be charged with crimes as serious as terrorism and incitement to hatred, even against children with disabilities, as Marta mentioned. We have ratified our previous conclusion that the justice system, especially the criminal system, led by the Supreme Court, its criminal appeal chamber, and its 4 terrorism courts, is manifestly subordinated to the interests of the executive power and has become a key instrument in the state's plan to repress all kinds of political and social dissent. These courts are monopolizing the proceedings against detainees after the elections, who are not allowed to have lawyers of their choice and tried in collective judicial proceedings without individualizing charges against them, which take place at night in detention centers, without effective public defenders, without publicity, and without being able to participate in the proceedings. Victims and a large part of general population are exposed to an arbitrary exercise of power, where arbitrary detention is systematically used together with serious violations of due process. We have previously warned that the government could activate the repressive apparatus at will, and indeed, that is what we are observing. Repression and human rights violations are widespread and systematic, and we must act urgently to protect victims and ensure that those responsible are held into account.
Thank you, Patricia and Francisco. Some of the human rights violations we have investigated during this period represent a continuation of the same course of conduct that we previously characterized as crimes against humanity. These violations were not the result of isolated or random events, but rather are part of a series of events committed in implementation of a coordinated plan to silence, discourage, and suffocate the opposition to President Maduro's government. Taking into account this course of conduct, the state plan that we have mentioned, the profile of the victims, and the public statements issued by high-ranking state representatives, we have reasonable grounds to believe that during the time frame covered by our mandate, the crime of persecution on political grounds has been committed in the Bolivarian Republic of Venezuela. Thank you. We look forward to answering questions from the press.
Thank you. Let's take one question from the back. If you could just please identify yourself and the media outlet that you work for. Please go ahead. Thanks.
Yes, thank you. I'm working for Agence France Presse, AFP. My name is Agnès Pedrero. I would like to ask you two quick questions. The first question is about the EU top diplomat Borrell, who on Sunday called the Venezuelan government dictatorial. So I wanted to ask you if you share the same analysis, and why, if you could explain why does it matter to qualify the Venezuelan government. And a quick question, I wanted to ask you if you have studied or plan to look at the allegations concerning the presence of the Russian mercenary group Wagner last month during the elections. Thank you.
Thank you for your question. We believe that more importantly than qualifying politically what this government is or is not, is to document what is happening in terms of facts on the ground. And what we have been documenting is a violation of several human rights. Of course, the ones mentioned in our mandate, most of all, and we have given you an account of all the serious violations that have been committed, including violations of due process, violations to the right to life, to not being illegally imprisoned, not being subject to torture, and so on. And we believe that that is the most important thing. That is what our mandate also tells us to do. It is clear that there is also in Venezuela at the moment, and we have pointed out last year as well, violations of fundamental civil and political rights, including the right to participate in public decisions and in political life. And this, of course, includes the right to be able to express your views, to have a democratic dialogue. All of this, I think, is what leads some observers and some important institutions and their representatives to qualify the government and as a dictatorship. But we really believe that, most importantly, our role is to document the facts rather than qualify the political system in Venezuela today. I will leave to one of my colleagues to answer your second question.
We were in the process of documenting this report, and so we had to shift a little bit the focus of our report because of the events that were occurring after the elections. We have received information and documented and reported that civilians are participating in parts of the repression with the acquiescence or tolerance of members of the security forces like the Guardia Nacional, the police. We haven't not received information about the Wagner group. If we are renewed, then we have to go on with the investigation. But so far, we have not received information in that sense. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Jamie from the Associated Press, did you have a question?
Hi, yes, thank you. I suspect my question is for Madame Valiñas. Just two questions that are kind of related. We've seen some accusations in recent days from the Venezuelan government about an assassination attempt. They've arrested some people. Do you have any sign that that is credible or not credible, those allegations? Have you been able to assess those allegations at all? And just more broadly, you issue a number of recommendations at the end of your report, but what really can be done here? I mean, we're talking about a government that has been in power for a number of years. There was obviously an attempt, a Western-backed attempt to bring in another president that didn't seem to go very far. What really can be done? What should the international community be doing, and what should Venezuelans themselves be doing to try to make sure that there's some sort of a change in government or greater democracy in Venezuela? Thank you.
Thank you for your question. In relation to the recent allegations of an attempt to assassinate President Maduro, we cannot really say anything, first of all, because our investigations for the report we are now publishing were finished by the end of August, so it doesn't cover this period. Nonetheless, this type of allegations of assassination attempts or conspiracies to overthrow the government, to attack government institutions, to assassinate the president, are nothing new. In fact, we have seen several of those allegations of so-called conspiracies. And I'm saying so-called because it is also not part of our main mandate, as we understand it, to investigate whether these are serious conspiracies or not. What we can say, and we have said in several of our reports and in our most recent report again, is that on the ground of these alleged conspiracies, several human rights violations have been committed. In our current report, we take note that only since December 2023, there have been, according to the authorities, 10 so-called conspiracies, which have led to the detention of at least 48 persons and warrants of arrest being issued against another 15. And this is only in the period between December 2023 and March 2024. Now, we have investigated 25 of these cases. For example, only 8 of these individuals that have been detained and six against whom warrants of arrest were issued belong to the opposition party of the candidate Maria Corina Machado. What we have found is that in these detentions, not only serious due process guarantees, serious violations of due process guarantees are committed, detentions are arbitrary, and clearly the individuals being targeted include persons, as I just mentioned, that are members of political parties, of the political opposition, but also we've seen human rights defenders. Rocio San Miguel is one of them, who has been detained allegedly because of being, according to the authorities, linked to one of these conspiracies, but journalists and other members of civil society. And we find this extremely concerning. So the use of the alleged conspiracies to actually silence critical voices or those that are seen by the government as threats to their power and people who they see as opposing them. So we actually, I think, are concerned with a new allegation of another conspiracy or assassination attempt and what that may mean in terms of further violations of human rights. Patricia.
Well, I am just trying to say something because there are many, many people in many parts of the world asking what really can be done about Venezuela. Because if you look around, there are many things that, for example, try to categorize the regime as a political regime that is, it puts very nervous to the authorities of the Bolivarian Republic of Venezuela, but it's the right of the political scientists to say about what kind of political regime is, and nothing happens. The international denounce and the international condemnation of the regime is also a tactic that many countries put in place, and the regime or the government answer with ironic sentences, because this is a very common way of talking, mock about the people who are suffering also, who are in prison, insulting them, saying that they are guilty of horrible crimes, etc. So from my point of view, and our view is very difficult because the international scenario, and because until today, the government showed that it's not a very big problem from them, hearing every day this kind of qualification. But perhaps it's a problem that they dedicate most of the time of each day to insult and basically insult all the people, all the citizens, all the countries, including in the middle of all these insults, they make a lot of bloopers, declaring, for example, that they are leading the international fascist order or something like that. So I think that the main point is not to feel tired about this and continue to say what is really happening inside Venezuela, and also highlights that there is no other migration so huge that the Venezuelan in the region. The role of the countries of the region, from our point of view, is a key role, and they have to talk each other to go forward. This is, in the other hand, the government will continue to suffocate and to try to eliminate in a symbolic but also in a physical way all kind of opposition, because until today the only will that we can see is a strong will to maintain the power, the business, and the benefits to be in the power.
Yeah, just briefly, I think, as Patricia was saying, each member of the international community must do or comply with their duty. So the Human Rights Council must keep an eye on the situation in Venezuela. Members and states who have embassies in Caracas should open their doors and give refuge to those who are persecuted, as we have reported, and provide the protection that international law gives them in front of these human rights violations. Accountability is also important. So we have created an international criminal court to make it function. So since there is an investigation ongoing, the International Criminal Court could be active in this situation. And of course, they're independent and they make their own decisions. but I think it's important that they play their role too. And some member states have universal jurisdiction that are ongoing, like Argentina, and that is also a key part of this element. Our role is to, at least our mandate ends out, if they renew the mandate, is to keep documenting these human rights violations and crimes against humanity.
You had a follow-up? Go ahead.
Just a very quick follow-up. I mean, you mentioned two things that are you mentioned the International Criminal Court and you mentioned the regional countries. I mean, I really wanted to try to move forward on this idea of what actually can be done. For example, I mean, does it need to have more regional pressure on the government? I mean, we've obviously seen a change of government not too long ago in neighboring Colombia, which has kind of changed the makeup of the region. We have, you know, there's obviously the effort to install Juan Guaido by other countries, but I'm just wondering if, for example, ideas like trying to give an exit ramp to Maduro so that he could go and live in another country, a Truth and Reconciliation Commission, or some sort of other external judicial or reconciliation mechanism that could, for example, clear or give some sort of reckoning to the military, for example, or the paramilitary groups and various others, or judicial system. I just wondering if any of those ideas are kind of on the plate for you. Have you seen anything along those lines?
Thank you. Well, in terms of what could be some of the exit strategies or political negotiation strategies, we won't really make a statement about that because it's really not part of our mandate to make recommendations about the political, let's say, solution. But we do find it incredibly important at this point that there is, you mentioned regional pressure by other countries in the Latin American region and those that are perhaps closer to Venezuela. And yes, I think that is part of what Patricia was mentioning before, that it is important that all countries, including, of course, those that may have more channels of communication with the Venezuelan authorities, as well as institutions, international, regional institutions that Francisco mentioned. It is very important that all of these actors continue to place Venezuela and the human rights violations that are taking place there in the center of the discussion, beyond any ideological or political interests and stances. It is very important, therefore, also that when thinking of a possible transition or negotiation, that we also keep the ideas and concepts of justice and reparation at the center of the discussion. So whatever could be the solution to the current political crisis in Venezuela has to also take into account that we have been living and are living at the moment a serious human rights crisis, beyond, of course, the humanitarian crisis that Patricia also alluded to with the mass exodus that we have seen in the past years, and may see again a resurge thereof because of the discontent and the level of frustration of the population in the country. But what needs to be at the center is justice for what, and accountability for the violations that have been committed, reparation for the victims that have suffered these violations, and of course all the reforms and changes, not only in institutions and legislation, but also, and most importantly, in the practices of state security forces and other state institutions that have been deeply involved in the commission of the violations that we have outlined in our different reports. Thank you.
Thank you. We'll take one more question from the room, and then we'll go to those of you who are joining us online. Please go ahead.
Isabel Saco with F Spanish News Agency. I would like to rebound on the issue of migration and the risk of a new wave of Venezuelan people migrating from their country. And do you see, from the conversations that you have had during the last month and a half with people inside and outside Venezuela, the signs that people inside are again willing massively to get out of the country? And second question is, I read that in the report that there are, among the people arrested, there are military personnel. And I would like to know if the number of people, military or security forces, people arrested is meaningful. And if you have also seen any sign of a break of the unity in the military corps. Thank you.
I mean, what we've seen so far, I mean, if you see the borders, it doesn't seem that there has been a large increase in numbers of people leaving Venezuela. But it might, I mean, obviously all countries who have borders and have received a lot of migrants from Venezuela are alert and monitoring the situation. But from what we've seen so far, it hasn't happened. It'll depend, I guess, on a lot of things. If the level of repression continues, if the humanitarian crisis increases, of course, this will have an impact, and I think it's foreseeable that this will be the consequence both of humanitarian crisis and human rights crisis.
Yes, I would add to that one thing that our team of investigators has noticed also is that due to the most recent wave of repression, people that we are speaking with who are in Venezuela are increasingly afraid to speak out against what has happened to them, what is happening at the moment. And this means that people are indeed afraid to speak out, are afraid to live normally in their country, especially when they have a profile of someone who either because they are journalists or human rights defenders, members of civil society who express their views about the situation in their country, people are afraid of doing their job. And so all of this together could contribute to a new wave of migration as well, of people fleeing the country. And this also, of course, might include members of the political opposition, and that has happened in the past already. We have several key members of the political opposition who, I remind you, live in exile already for some years, and that's because of the politically motivated persecution that we have spoken about. Now, regarding your question about military personnel, we have documented already in several of our previous reports, and again in this one, that there have been several members of the military who have been accused of being involved in the so-called conspiracies to overthrow the government. And they have been arbitrarily detained. We have seen in the period covered by our current report, actually sentences being handed down in one of those cases linked to the so-called Operación Gedeón. We're talking about very high, very severe sentences applied to these individuals. And when I say these individuals are both members of the military and people that are not members of the military, but are associated with them and that have been implicated in these conspiracies. And so even if the numbers are not as high as maybe civilians that have been detained, definitely these cases have also a special effect on others that would be considering expressing their views against the government and who belong to the military or are associated with persons who belong to the military. So we believe that this also has a chilling effect in the same way that a detention of a human rights defender has in civil society and other human rights defenders, or a detention of a journalist has in the work of other journalists. So we do think that these detentions and the severe sentences handed down on these individuals has a very big and important impact, and also in the ability of those within the military who may wish to not follow the orders of their government. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Let's go to some questions online. We'll take the first one from Bianca Rotier from the Globo TV in Brazil.
Yes, hi. Thanks a lot. Yeah, you were talking about the importance of the international pressure. So from all you investigated, if the pressure from Brazil, I mean, the largest democracy in South America, if the pressure of Brazil on Nicolás Maduro regime have been stronger, would the situation be different now? Do you think the tensions and deaths could have been avoided with a stronger pressure from Lula? And do you think the situation can still deteriorate even more? Thanks.
Well, it's difficult to see the future, but one of the big problems that has the Bolivarian government is that they are not delivering signs of be open to dialogue, and this is one of the most difficult attitudes to evaluate from outside in terms of seeing what are the real possibility to be closer and to have a conversation about the near future. But of course, the geopolitical situation of Brazil and the size of the country and the historic role in the region, in addition that has a very extensive border with Venezuela, there are all characteristics that seems to be that a strong position from Brazil, perhaps, only perhaps, could persuade Nicolás Maduro to initiate, and I have to emphasize initiate, a serious conversation about a possible way to go forward in this situation. Because until today, at least the speakers from the Colombia and Brazil mainly, and in a less voice Mexico, expressed to who are not members of those governments that there is no easy conversation and there is no easy situation to start a real conversation with the Bolivarian government. So Brazil is really an important country. It was quite confused sometimes, the messages that from Itamaraty and from the president also, but we hope that can play a meaningful role because their history, because the relevance of the trade between two nations and because the extension of the border.
Okay, thank you. We'll go to Laurent Sierra from the Swiss News Agency.
Yeah, thanks for taking my question. In a previous report in 2022, you could say that sources had identified a direct link between the President Maduro and orders that were given in certain instances for arrest, and that was the case as well for his wife, for the president of the Constituent National Assembly, and a former vice president who then became minister. So in the whole period before and after this presidential election, could you also verify direct instances where orders for certain arrests and or for certain violations were directly given by the president and by other high-ranking officials? Thank you.
As we say in the report, these acts are in the line of conduct that we have been reporting before and during all of our mandate period. In this instance, we see the public statements of Maduro, of Diosdado Cabello, and the actions taken even by the prosecutor, the general prosecutor, and they all fit in with the same pattern that we have identified previously. In this instance, since we were kind of caught by time, we were not able to document insiders giving us the direct information. But we think that if one reviews the public statements of the authorities, as we mentioned, Operación Tuntún, the fact that they gave the numbers, the public numbers of detainees were higher even than those reported by NGOs, I think we can say that it satisfies that, as we said, is in the same line of conduct, and that these we have reasonable basis to believe that the crime of persecution is being committed, has been committed also previously, and that we are seeing arbitrary detentions with no judicial orders, with no factual grounds for in flagrante delito. So, yeah.
Okay, thank you. Let's go to Emma Farge from Reuters.
Good morning. I think I'm right in saying that the mandate is up for renewal at the current council meeting. I was wondering how hopeful you were feeling about that. And maybe you could say a word about how important it is that you continue your work in the current context. Thank you.
Thank you. Well, what is the most important thing, as we already mentioned, is that really Venezuela is part of the discussions of the Human Rights Council, continues to be part of the discussions and the tension of the Human Rights Council and its members. And in that respect, we do believe that a renewal of the mandate of the mission, but also that of the Office of the High Commissioner, a renewed call for the Venezuelan authorities to allow special procedures, also special procedure mandate holders to enter the country and analyze the situation. All of these actors of the United Nations, I think, have a very important role to play in documenting, analyzing the situation, formulating recommendations, and of course the members of the Council to take action. Also, as we have noted in our report, we have had a very limited time to conduct investigations on what has happened after the elections. As I mentioned before, our investigations for the current report had to end by the end of August. So we had 1 month, really, to conduct investigations, and we believe that we need more time to investigate further and deeper some of the violations that have occurred in the pre- and post-electoral contexts, and of course in the current weeks. And so we do see that we have work to do still, shall our mandate be renewed. Thank you.
Okay, let's go to Lisa Schlein from the Voice of America.
Yes, good morning. A couple of questions. First, have you given your report to the government, and have you received any response? And also on the question of sanctions, are they actually effective or not? Should they continue to be used? I'm thinking most recently about the United States, which did have a lot of sanctions on Venezuela, and lifted the sanctions in the hopes of having a freer democratic election, which didn't occur. So should they be imposed, or do you believe that they are ineffective and that they indeed are very harmful to the population at large, and this should not be used as a pressure point? Thank you.
Thank you very much for the question. As in any occasion that we come to the Human Rights Council to report, we offer previously to the government, we write to the government offering the report, as we usually write to ask some question or ask for the possibility to receive judicial files to complete our investigation, but we never had the privilege to receive an answer from the government. And regarding the sanctions, we are usually not given opinion. Perhaps we only have a say about the agreements that the government signed in 2023 in Barbados, that was at that time promising a path to free elections and a situation that really was envisioned at that time very different than the current situation the Venezuelan people experience.
Okay, any more questions from the room or online? Okay, well, that wraps it up. Thank you all for joining us today, and have a good day.
Muy bien, entonces hemos escuchado en estos precisos momentos la rueda de prensa y el informe de la misión de la ONU para Venezuela, donde ha manifestado que el gobierno comete crímenes de lesa humanidad, de persecución. Bien, esto ocurrió en Ginebra el 17 de septiembre. El gobierno de Nicolás Maduro en Venezuela está cometiendo el crimen de lesa humanidad de persecución por motivos políticos, manifestó el martes la Misión de Establecimiento de Hechos creados por el Consejo de Derechos Humanos de la ONU para documentar las violaciones que ocurren en el país. Bien, como hemos visto, no está traducido al español, sino ha estado en el idioma original inglés, pero de igual forma pusimos el subtítulo para que cada uno de ustedes pueda conocer exactamente lo que ha manifestado la ONU, bien, a través justamente de esta rueda de prensa que se realizó el día de ayer, para ser precisos. Muy bien, entonces recordarles que según la misión presidida por la jurista portuguesa Marta Valiñas, el aparato del gobierno se centra ahora en aplastar a la totalidad de la oposición pacífica a través de una serie de acciones que no son aisladas o aleatorias, sino parte de un plan continuo y coordinado para silenciar, desanimar y reprimir a quienes pueden expresar algún pensamiento no acorde con la retórica oficial. Estamos presenciando una intensificación del aparato represivo del Estado. Aunque esto es una continuación de patrones previos, la presión reciente debido a su intensidad y carácter sistemático representa un ataque muy grave a los derechos fundamentales del pueblo venezolano, manifestó Valiñas al presentar a la prensa en Ginebra el último informe elaborado por su equipo. La misión, que también integran el abogado chileno Francisco Cox y la experta argentina en derechos humanos Patricia Tapata, apoyados por un equipo técnico, presentará oficialmente el jueves su informe al Consejo de Derechos Humanos de Naciones Unidas. Entre los hechos y conclusiones que resalta es que la actual crisis que vive Venezuela es la peor de la historia reciente y que se ha alcanzado un nuevo hito en el deterioro del Estado de Derecho tras las elecciones presidenciales del 28 de julio. Bien, para los miembros de la misión, las autoridades públicas ya ni siquiera intentan fingir cierta independencia y la ciudadanía está totalmente indefensa ante la arbitrariedad, porque muchas garantías judiciales han perdido su efectividad. El informe, que inicialmente comprende el periodo del 1 de septiembre de 2023 y el 31 de agosto pasado, ha sido actualizado para cubrir los hechos previos y posteriores a los comicios. Entre los casos documentados se encuentran 48 detenciones entre diciembre y marzo pasado bajo el cargo de conspiración, así como órdenes de arresto contra otras personas que no solo son activistas, periodistas u opositores políticos, sino incluso militares. Durante julio, en plena campaña electoral, hubo 120 detenidos, aunque otras 2.000 personas corrieron la misma suerte después del escrutinio, de acuerdo a datos de las propias autoridades, que les acusan de terrorismo e incitación al odio. Según la misión, entre estos últimos había al menos un centenar de menores de edad, algunos con discapacidades. La misión ya había advertido que el gobierno podría activar su aparato represivo a voluntad, y eso es lo que estamos viendo ahora, manifestó Cox, quien insistió en el clima de terror que se vive en la población venezolana. Muy bien, esta es la información que queremos brindar, y recordar que esta presentación de la ONU lo hemos mostrado el íntegro, que dura exactamente un poco más de 52 minutos para que puedan conocer exactamente todo el informe y también la rueda de prensa. Esto sería todo por mi parte. Somos JF Digital, informó José Fernández para más noticias de política y actualidad.